Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second part of our webinar for sales for startups. Obviously, initially we spoke about how do you choose the right people that you want in your team, and today is everything to do how do you onboard them as quickly as possible so they can add value as quickly as possible and get the business as usual going ASAP. So without further ado, I will introduce for a second time James Ker-Reid, CEO and founder of Sales for Startups. James, the mic is over to you.
Thank you very much, Isabella. It's great to be back. For those who don't know me, I'm CEO of Sales for Startups. So I'm going to be guiding you through how to onboard salespeople like a pro and cut their ramp time in half. Really big topic at the moment. A lot of people are doing remote onboarding. They're doing disjointed onboarding for the norm. So really, really important topic. Probably worth giving you a brief intro into who I am and who we are as a company. So Sales for Startups was set up about 3 years ago, really to solve the problem around that fewer than 1 in 10 B2B tech startups succeed, often because their founders lack the sales experience and the bandwidth needed to deliver predictable revenue. So at Sales for Startups, our team of experts bring their own sales leadership experience to your business in order to dramatically increase your revenue. We found that there's a kind of perfect formula to doing this, and we call it the 3 Ps. So it's proposition, people, and process. And that will help you achieve predictable revenue, get to your next funding round, and ultimately achieve product market fit. So it's a good partnership for us here with SeedLegals. Obviously, multiple funding rounds for our clients, and obviously you've got to get your legals right and share schemes and the rest as well as you go through that progression journey. So really excited to be invited back. Just a bit of housekeeping before I kick off with today's presentation. If you've got questions as we go, do put them in the questions tab. So you'll see on the right hand of your screen for most of you, there's a questions part. Just type in the box there and we'll come to that. We'll have about 20 minutes of presenting, then we'll go to Q&A for about 20 minutes as well. You can ask me anything about onboarding, about salespeople, about growing sales at a tech company. It doesn't necessarily have to be around this topic, as some of you may have come on today just to hopefully speak to me, if it's not about onboarding as well. So without further ado, are we all good to go, Isabella? Should we kick off with things today?
Yeah, all good to go.
All good to go. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, welcome. And let's kick off with the first thing. This is going to be the first technical test. So hopefully this is going to work quite well. Yep. So, okay. Right. So in terms of today, we are picking up from last week's session, or it's actually 2 weeks ago now, around selecting the best salespeople. We're going to be talking about the last stage in what we talked about, the 5S process to selecting the best salespeople, that onboarding and that starting phase, which is really, really important to your progression as a tech company. So you can obviously look back and look to the previous recording if you want to know about the other 4 stages. Cool. So in terms of today's agenda, we're going to review the top mistakes. These are unfortunately real quotes from real founders of tech companies. And also we're going to look at how do you know if your onboarding is working? So that's a key question I get from a lot of tech founders, is how do we know if to make changes to the process? What are the phases of onboarding? So we'll go through the 4 phases of onboarding and what that includes, and then also some of the key components of each of those phases. So we're going to build out those 4 stages with some detail. And then obviously the environment that we're all in today, we're going to talk about a couple of tips for remote onboarding, and hopefully ask you guys for some participation in that as well, so we can crowdsource some great ideas as well for everyone here today. Cool. So first and foremost, let's look at the 10 mistakes. These are things you really shouldn't make. These are being made by real founders of tech companies that I've interviewed and worked with. So often we hear quotes like, it's been a bit of a lackluster day. you don't want that experience to happen with your new starters, especially salespeople. These are driven, determined, and quite often outspoken people, it could be said at times. So it's really important you put the preparation in and don't do that. A couple other ones I wanted to pick out, the kind of old school way of doing onboarding, which is we'll get them to shadow our top salespeople. Really, really big mistake, mainly because salespeople have key strengths, but they also have key weaknesses as well. And they have character strengths and character weaknesses as well. So you can't necessarily duplicate one high performer into another high performer because they're different people. They're engineered in different ways. Their brain is engineered in different ways as well. Milestones, some classic ones. Continuing into the second slide here. We'll see which one succeeds in their first 60 days. Yeah, absolutely hated this one. We came into contact with a tech company that had hired 4 VPs of sales to their B2B tech company. It's quite a high profile company. Received Series A investment, and yeah, they just sort of throw them the gauntlet and see what happens. Definitely don't do this. Number 8, they have a book of contacts, so they work on those. I hear this from a lot of people that have been in the industry that potentially their product or software is sold into or is part of. They often talk about, can we find someone with industry expertise and put them in? They've got those connections. They'll enable us to get those next 5, 10, 20, or maybe 100 customers if you're in the SME market. You know, I think the other one as well is just thinking it from a founder's perspective. You don't want to go into a new employment arrangement and think, I'm not sure if this person's right. We've got that probation period. Let's just see if it works for us. That's really not the way to go forward. You're really looking at a long-term relationship with a salesperson. For those that are interested in learning, there's something called the 2-year rule, which is where you see a massive ramp up in terms of productivity and ultimately company value that employee creates within a 2-year period. And it's to do with the learning cycle and the psychology behind it as well. But yeah, we can ask away and maybe in the Q&A about that. So moving forward then, like, what's the point in terms of doing this? Well, first and foremost, the cost is pretty large. There's about 5.7 million businesses in the UK that suffer from this problem of hiring the wrong people. So that's 5.7 million businesses average of 125,000 cost. So that's pretty big average for quite a large number every single year spent on failed hires. I picked up a couple of my favorites as well. The bottom 20% of salespeople leave in their first 45 days. So if you're not optimizing your experience for them, then you will see a massive loss in productivity as a company and also opportunity cost as well. This recent one is from HRM, 91% of employees who experience an engaging onboarding stay longer than a year. So the kind of question I would ask yourself is, there is a real upside for getting this right, and why have I got it wrong so many times? Probably maybe because you might not have a strategy, you might not have a clear walkthrough as to how you do it. And hopefully today we're going to give you some of the key ingredients to that. So how do you know if your onboarding is working right now? Really key question. Most founders ask us. I've never actually seen anyone present in my whole career a framework of how you actually decide this. So hopefully this is going to be useful for you guys today. There are a couple of key things you should know. The first one's quite easy around goal achievement. So we're looking at have they achieved their goals, and they are goals within milestones, and we'll come on to talk about what those milestones could be in terms of timeframes. Productivity, have they reached that productivity level that you wanted to create? That could be volume, it could be quality, it could be a combination of both. Churn as well. So you look at a company perspective, what is your employee churn at the moment? What does that look like in terms of roles and divisions as well? So you can ascertain, where some of the problems may lie. And then connected to what we'll talk about later about becoming a team asset. We don't actually hire new staff at our company, myself included, just to do a job. We ask them to do more than we expected. It's that sense of over delivery for our company, because we don't want a robotic individual. We want someone to be creative. We want someone to bring new ideas, to take those ideas into action and gain business value, which is really, really important. So moving forward then. So the phases of onboarding. Now, this is really, really important that you do actually have a structured process to onboarding. I've seen some really terrible onboarding experiences. I've personally been through a couple of poor ones as well myself. So yeah, no shout out for certain managers on that before, but this is quite commonplace. So the first four phases, or the four phases, should I say, of improving your onboarding is what we refer to as the port, getting to port. So it's pre-boarding, the onboarding, the ramping up, and the team asset phase. So I've heard a lot of people talk about it takes 6 months to onboard a senior hire. I've been a senior hire. I've hired senior salespeople and also company directors before, and actually that's not true. It doesn't necessarily take 6 months to onboard a senior leader. In 3 months, that person can become an asset to the company. And I used to sell into big enterprises as well, and I've seen sort of CEOs of listed companies be exited from the business within 3 months as well, because of their strategy, because their way of working, and obviously they hadn't reached that productive level that we talked about earlier. So it's really important that we just have a little bit of a mindset shift away from, because it's a complex role, it's 6 months. Even if your probation period is 6 months, which for senior hires it probably will be, that doesn't mean that that person doesn't need to be an asset within 3 months. And you should really articulate that to the future hire, is that yes, it's a 6-month probation, that we have this kind of almost insurance policy on both sides. But more importantly, we really want to see if you can become an asset for our company within the first 3 months. And so we all know why that 3 months is really important, because we know that the first 3 months dictates the employee and the employer's experience of the value that we're seeking to arrange through the engagement of those two parties. So if you don't provide value, you're going to be out the door pretty quickly. So let's build these phases. A couple of things. Sorry, I'm going quite quickly, guys. We can always skip back as well to certain slides in the Q&A as well. So pre-boarding, might have heard of this phrase. It's quite an Americanism, weirdly enough, these days. But you've got to look at some pre-boarding phases to drive up that adoption and that value in that first week. So pre-boarding, just to clarify, is before the employee's first day. It's really, really important that you are able to have that. That could be as much as a month, but in very effective employers, you could actually do this in a week. If that new employee had cleared their calendar and was really committed to the process, you can actually do it in a week. So the first part of that is around technical reading. So I picked out one resource here for, say, a VP of sales as an example, Cracking the Sales Management Code. Very, very good book around how we as leaders within sales and startups, for example, and how many of the successful sales leaders within the industry would look to break down a company goal into objectives and activities, and how they measure those KPIs, how they come up with those objectives. So really important that you bring everyone up to the level that you expect them to be at. And also there are a couple of fundamental books that probably as founders has certainly engineered the way you think, or the way you plan, or even the way in which you deliver your product. So that could be it could be something like Sprint by Jake Knapp, if it's more of a technical role, as an example. Second one is around personal development and mindset. I put Mindset by Carol Dweck. It's one of my favorite books around the growth and the fixed mindset. Really, really important that you bring everyone to the same cultural expectation you have as a founder, rather than anticipating that just due to the interview process, that person is going to be in the right frame of mind to join your company. Normally, there are a couple of, I would say, 3 to 5 non-negotiables within every founder's head that is not necessarily communicated clearly. And one easy way to do that is by selecting the right books for people to read. Career development, I put 2 examples here, The First 90 Days or The Alliance by Reid Hoffman. Then finally, IT tools and admin. So this is an area that just really, really frustrates me and has as onboarding new salespeople, both when I was employed as well as when we go and help B2B tech companies grow their revenues, that the sufficiency of those companies to plan ahead and put the right tools in place, like turning up on your first day without a laptop, not sure where your logins are, where your passwords are. At least 90% of these things should be eliminated before first day, so that you can walk in first day with a laptop, with access to the tools and the platforms you need, and you can actually start adding value and understanding the company in that first week. Really, really important. So moving forward, so we're going into the onboarding phase. It's typically kind of 1 to 3 weeks as an indicative guide for most companies. It depends a little bit on size, but just to give you an overview of what the key themes here are. So in week 1, we're looking at the value proposition and product. You've got to be able to articulate your value to the market as a company, but also to those new employees. What do we actually do? What value do we provide? What does the success journey look like when a new client comes on to our platform or our product? And if you can't articulate that, then one, you probably need to seek some outside help to do that. And secondly, that maybe you're not in the right position to hire and onboard that person. Maybe you need to do some of the pre-work before that. The second thing is around the market. So you've got to give that new employee the contextual understanding to what is the market that you are focused on, who is your target market, who are those clients, who are those buyer personas that you empower, who are those user personas as well, who are those influencers potentially if you're selling at a higher level in terms of B2B enterprise sales. You need to know that journey of in effect who all these personas are and some of the clients. And then finally I put in the case studies as well. So what are those 3 to 5 really successful clients you've had that are almost those landmark marquee customers that could grow your company exponentially and probably have to this date, and hence maybe why you're hiring this person as well, is that you are setting your goals bigger than before. So on to week 2, pitching value. So what I mean by that is we actually need to see whether the salesperson can pitch value of your product to the right people. So we're talking about role plays here. We're talking about preparation for meetings. We're looking to understand how they can hold a room, how they can respond to questions, maybe objections, how they can respond and follow up as well. You can do this with sometimes different people at the company, so i.e. kind of a buddy system, or you can do it with the founder if you're a smaller team at this point in time as well, just to see how they follow up in week 2, how they respond to those objections, what questions they might ask you. So doing kind of a role play of the way you operate. Secondly, sales process. It is obviously a major failure point of many tech startups, but you've got to be able to guide a prospect as well as a new employee through that sales process. So why do we have these stages? What are the activities involved in the sales process? What are the key gives? What are the key questions that our prospects ask at this stage of the process? And hence empower that individual to sell properly. And then finally, some best practice on forecasting revenue as well. So we need to start moving that person further ahead and thinking about, okay, so when we get a deal in, what are some of the common practices? When we get them in at the early stage, stage? What sort of time frame do we put on that deal as a close date? What are the factors that mean that we would move it to this stage and that stage? When we talk about weighted forecast, what are the percentages maybe at each stage of the process? So you can actually understand what you want to see as a founder and maybe as a leadership team, and hence, what are the best practices that they should install. So moving on to ramping. So now we're into kind of the acceleration phase. So typically we're talking the sort of day 30 to day 60 at this point in time. We need to see whether they, after that initial discovery call and screening, we can actually move into demo proficiency. So able to connect the potential buyer needs to the solution and be able to demo that in real time. This is quite a tailored and sophisticated skill, but as salespeople, we need to be able to do that, especially if you've got a revenue quota target as well. Customer expansion plans. A lot of tech startups won't necessarily have a true process for growing existing accounts. I see a lot of these investor decks where they've got lovely 10 logos on the screen, and then when you ask, can you tell me about the last year in terms of revenue growth within that account, it stayed at the same level all the way throughout the year. Now that's what we don't want to see within a new salesperson. So empowering them to actually create some of those customer expansion plans, map out those stakeholders within those accounts as well. It's really, really important. Some of these will be role specific, some of these won't necessarily be all new business salespeople. Customer visits are quite important. So in a remote environment, you may not be able to actually meet the customers face to face and do a kind of roadshow that we typically do with clients and new employees at our clients as well. But one thing you can do is maybe you've got some recorded calls. You can understand what these people sound like, what kind of questions they ask, what are some of their fears, what are some of their worries. Just really get under the skin of what it's like to be that individual that's buying your product or software regularly. It's really, really important. I see that as a neglected area in most people's onboarding, is they kind of think that they understand the problem and they think that they understand the value of the service, but they don't actually really truly understand the people that they're selling to or the company is selling to. Before we're kind of looking into that ramp phase, obviously starting to build pipelines. So you may have some company initiatives, you may have some kind of self-initiated activities that need to be fostered in order to grow pipeline. Obviously, we're looking for a first proposal as a exit of this phase. So you need to be ramping up towards that. That is a bit of a pre-boarding and preparation phases that most tech companies won't necessarily generate pipeline before they hire a new salesperson to close that pipeline. Fundamental mistake, and hence you won't necessarily see the progression of, say, by day 60 a first proposal coming for that client, because you haven't actually generated the pipeline in order for that, say, new business account executive to close that pipeline when they come through the door by day 60. So we move into the final phase around team asset. So we're looking at someone that can hold their own in an enterprise negotiation. So what does their negotiation preparation look like? What's their planning? What sort of behaviors, what sort of questions are they asking in the back and forth during the enterprise negotiations they're holding? Yeah, really a quite difficult skill to master. There's quite a few good books on this topic, but I would recommend if you really want to get serious with your business as well and you're onboarding a salespeople, you actually need to create a little bit of a guide to negotiation, and obviously use that as a working document to improve your negotiation as you learn from the market, learn from your peers as well. So then moving into demo mastery. So we talked about demo proficiency before this in the ramping phase, but you need to have someone that can completely own the demo after obviously that customer fact find, and enable them to run the demo from start to finish, be able to maybe do a second demo if you've got quite a technical product, potentially a third in some cases. Business case creation. So obviously the title is quite self-explanatory, but what we're talking about here is having someone that's an asset to the company. So if you're able to create, say you sell to mid-market or to enterprise customers, or at least I would say companies that have employee counts over about 200, 250 employees, you need to be able to put together business cases as to what the ROI is for that potential purchaser of your products and software. And you need to have this as down and as a skill at this point in time. We talked about customer expansion plans before, but enabling that person and seeing whether they have the skill to map out all the stakeholders is really important, especially if you're an enterprise. Like I said, this is quite important to negotiation as well. And then for the very productive ones, we'd actually look to see signing their first deal within their first 90 days. Now, I've seen a lot of people say that this can't be true. My sales cycle is 6 to 9 months. How could they sign a deal in 90 days? That's another question you should maybe ask yourself as well, is that have we generated, say, the pipeline in order to enable this person to sign their first deal in 90 days? Maybe not is the answer. So moving forward, as we just move forward into the Q&A for you guys attending. So what tips do I have for remote onboarding? So I've got one of my team members on the line, but I'll just go through a couple here as well. I mentioned this in the previous interview as well. So I've seen a lot of founders obviously onboarding multiple salespeople, but they don't often ask the new employee to create their own onboarding plan. So just think of it from an employee's perspective first and foremost, rather than an employer. If you're wanting to be really successful in a new role, why wouldn't you create your own onboarding plan? If you're an experienced professional and you've maybe worked for multiple companies before, you probably know yourself better than anyone else in terms of your own capabilities and skills. You know what's maybe going to be slightly challenging for you, where are your growth and development areas. So if you're not prepared to come to the table with your own onboarding plan and marry that with the employer's onboarding plan, then maybe that's a sign that you're not necessarily selecting A-game players. Digitiser Process, this is quite self-explanatory, but really do get your admin done before day one. There's so many instances where this is just a pain in the backside for most people. We've all been in that environment where we joined a new company and we're still waiting for this widget or this piece of software or this access code. And it's okay to have a couple of instances of that, but not necessarily major things like, I don't have access to the CRM. You don't want to spend the first half a day doing IT admin. It's just an absolute waste of time, because as an employer, the day one is when you start paying for that employee. So you need to make sure that day one is as most productive as possible. Calendar milestones and checkpoints. So we talked about a progressive 90-day onboarding period for salespeople, and reducing it from the typical 180 days down into 90. You've got to have those checkpoints. So we kind of refer to it normally as 2-week sprints. These kind of, as you can see, 4 out of 5 follow that mechanism, but really important to actually have check-in points that people realize and attend, and obviously have to look back and look forward during those milestones and checkpoints. And then the other thing that you can do as small companies, it's often neglected, is if you're hiring a new person in a new role, and maybe you're not a commercially enabled or experienced founder, but could you introduce them to mentors and influencers in the industry, people who know about maybe growing B2B tech sales companies? Would it be a good idea to introduce them to those mentors, to those people, and see, even if they could get maybe an hour to start with them, as to what they've learned from growing other sales divisions at tech companies? You haven't got endless cash flow, so why don't you put them in touch with some people that you really respect, you cherish, and maybe they even helped you in the recruitment process as well. And then finally, looking to test viability and productivity of that individual, looking to get them to own their small project in the first 30 days is really, really important. So that's it for me. I said about 25 minutes. We've just come up to time. We've got a couple of resources from here from the guys, but yeah, I think that's it for me. I can switch to Q&A. Isabella, you probably come back off mute, so ready to
Yeah,
rock and roll.
great. Thank you very much, James. Everybody, just to reiterate, I mean, you may not have any questions, but if you do, put them in the chat on the right. So James, another James asks, great presentation. There is a lot here that should have ideally been covered in the recruitment process. How early in the process do you ideally want to get involved? And I think he's referring to sales for startups.
Yeah, so sales for startups, we will we help set the proposition, help you select the right people for your growth stage, and we actually help you run that whole recruitment and selection process, and then the onboarding itself and the ramping up to a high performance. So to answer your question in very simple words, the whole process, because the selecting the right people has got to come from a strategic intent. So you've got to know what your business is like, what you're trying to achieve. Hence, is that the right call for you? Is that the right decision for you? And the last webinar, Isabella, we went into quite a lot of detail into how you actually make those decisions as a founder. And how you actually select that person. So yeah, check that out, everyone, if you'd like to understand more about selecting the right people.
And would you say that sales for startups niche is only B2B technology?
Yeah, B2B technology. We don't do any B2C. The only variant I would say of that is that we do kind of B2B2C. So some of you may have marketplace platforms where you have businesses on one side and then consumers on the other. So it might be like you run, say, a student rental marketplace. So you'll have like students on one side, but you'll have the landlords and the agencies on the other side, as an example. They would be clients of ours. We have quite a few kind of platform and marketplace customers. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that does perfectly. There doesn't seem to be any other questions. You must have covered it very thoroughly. Well, at least that's what I thought. Does anybody else have any questions? And if you don't, not to fret, you are going to be receiving an email right after this webinar, linking you to be able to book a direct consultation with the team, also linking you to an ebook, which you're getting exclusive access to. So there's always time to ask questions, if not now. James, if not, would you like to bring in Alex to talk about remote working, or do you think you covered that?
Oh yeah, I think it'd be good to actually hear from someone else as well. It's great for me to tell the perfect story, but I think it's quite relevant. We've got a new team member at Sales Startups, Alex Cook, to talk about remote onboarding and what his experience has been like, what have been maybe some of his learns, his highs, maybe some improvements for you guys to take on as founders, joining the session today.
Okay, great. Well, Alex is just getting ready to join. Here he is. And for anybody to have context, guys, Alex is the big and most recent hire in sales startups and pretty much a pro at this sort of stuff. So yeah, Alex, over to you.
Thanks, guys. I hope you can hear me all right. Yeah, so I guess James covered a lot of the advice towards the end, and there was that first point around creating an onboarding plan yourself, which I think really kind of stuck with me. And the reason for that was there was one specific point in there that brought me up to speed almost within a day, or I like to think so, but every day since then has thrown up its new challenges. And that was me coming up with a categorized list of questions myself. So it's not so much what am I going to be doing in week 1 and week 2 and week 3. It was actually me saying, these are all the areas of the business that I would love to know more information about. So I categorized that into areas like company history, company ambitions, sales performance to date, marketing activities, the strengths and weaknesses of that. And then also perhaps some more miscellaneous type questions that when you're remote working, you don't have that desk kind of chat. You don't have that opportunity to, really quickly, oh, hey, can I ping you about this or that? Summarizing all of that into a document and sharing it with the team in advance of my first day meant that the time that we had was as efficient as it could possibly be, and brought me up to speed far quicker than had those questions been drip fed over a few days, a couple of weeks, whatever it might be. And the kind of additional benefit, I guess, was some of those questions the team might have not really had the opportunity to think about. And it made them question their own beliefs as well, and it generated a lot of great discussion. So going through that list of questions on that first day, I think is definitely something that I would personally recommend as a newbie who's joined remotely in a rather weird scenario, as I'm sure a lot of people are at the moment. But that's definitely something that I would personally recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's everything, and it seems that everybody's still here. So unless you guys have anything else to say, I think we can move on. I'd like to thank both of you for 2 series with me, which nobody knows this, but working with me can have its challenges. So yeah.
Well, yeah, we don't want to talk too much about that, but it's been okay. We've managed to muddle through. It's been okay, Isabella. So we've enjoyed it a lot.
But yeah, if not, everybody have a really good afternoon. And yeah, we'll see you at the next webinar.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Bye-bye.